It started with a single, innocent question. The community center in Lawrenceburg, Tennessee, was alive with chatter that evening. The scent of fresh brewed coffee and warm pastries filled the air as townspeople gathered for a meet and greet. It was the kind of place where people knew their neighbors by name, where life slowed down just enough for real connections to happen. Karoline Leavitt stood near a folding table, smiling warmly as she shook hands and listened to stories. She loved these moments, not because of the attention, but because of the honesty that people shared with her. As she spoke with an elderly woman about the local school system, she felt a small tug on her sleeve. She turned and looked down. A little girl, no older than 7, stood before her. She had chestnut curls that framed her round, freckled face, and her wide brown eyes were locked onto Karoline's necklace. It was a simple gold cross, nothing extravagant, nothing flashy. Yet the little girl pointed at it with a trembling finger and whispered, "What does your necklace mean?" The noise in the room didn't stop, but for Karoline, time seemed to slow. The question was simple, yet it carried a weight she hadn't expected. She opened her mouth to answer, but instead, her mind drifted to a night she had tried so hard to forget, a night that changed everything. Years ago, Karoline had been a freshman at Belmont University in Nashville, excited about her future, but overwhelmed by the struggle of balancing classes, 2 part-time jobs, and the ever-present feeling that she wasn't good enough. Her faith, which had once felt so natural, had become a distant thought, something she acknowledged out of habit rather than belief. Then, one night, her phone rang. It was just after midnight. She had been cramming for an exam, her dorm room dimly lit by the glow of her laptop. She almost ignored the call, but something made her pick up. The moment she heard her mother's voice, she knew. Her grandmother, the woman who had taught her how to bake biscuits from scratch, who always smelled of lavender, who spoke about faith like it was as real as the ground beneath them, was gone. A sudden heart attack. No warning. No goodbye. The next few hours passed in a fog. She packed a bag, caught a bus home, and stepped into a house that felt emptier than she ever thought possible. That night, unable to sleep, she wandered into her grandmother's bedroom. The scent of lavender still lingered, clinging to the blankets and pillows. On the nightstand sat a small object, a delicate gold chain with a cross pendant, resting on the worn pages of the Bible. Karoline picked it up, her fingers brushing against the cool metal. It felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried the weight of every lesson, every memory, every moment she had spent with her grandmother. For the first time since she had received the news, she let herself cry. And when the tears finally slowed, she slipped the chain over her head, letting the cross rest against her chest. She had no idea then how much that necklace would come to mean to her. At first, the necklace was just a piece of jewelry, something to hold on to, something that reminded her of the warmth and wisdom of the woman she had lost. But grief doesn't disappear overnight. There were days when she felt angry at herself, at the world, at God. Days when she questioned everything. How could faith be real if someone as kind and faithful as her grandmother was taken so suddenly? One night, she found herself alone in her dorm room, staring at the cross around her neck. She gripped it tightly, her knuckles turning white. "If you're really out there," she whispered into the darkness, "I need to know. I need to feel something, anything." Silence. No voice from the heavens. No sudden warmth or clarity. But something shifted. The tightness in her chest didn't disappear, but it loosened just a little. The emptiness didn't vanish, but it didn't feel quite as suffocating. It wasn't an answer, but it was something. And sometimes, something is enough to keep going. Over time, Karoline started to understand that grief wasn't something to get over. It was something to walk through, step by step, until the pain wasn't all-consuming anymore. And every time she reached the cross around her neck, she felt just a little steadier. Months later, Karoline sat in the student lounge, flipping through a textbook without really reading it. A classmate named Brandon, someone she barely knew outside of lectures, sat across from her. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face hollow. "You okay?" she asked. He hesitated before whispering, "My dad died last night." Karoline froze. She should have said, "I'm so sorry," or "That must be really hard." But those words felt too small, too thin. Instead, she reached for her necklace, rubbing the pendant between her fingers the way she had done 100 times before. "I lost my grandmother last year," she admitted. "I don't have the right words, but I know what it feels like to think nothing will ever make sense again." Brandon swallowed hard. He blinked rapidly. Karoline hesitated. Then, without thinking, she unclasped the necklace and held it out to him. His brows knitted together. I can't take that." "You're not taking it," she said softly. "Just borrowing it until you feel like you can breathe again." Brandon stared at her like she had given him something far bigger than a piece of jewelry. Then, with shaking hands, he took it. That was the first time Karoline realized that faith wasn't about having all the answers. It was about showing up. Years later, standing in that community center, Karoline looked at the little girl in front of her, the one who had unknowingly stirred up all those memories with a simple question. "My grandmother gave me a necklace just like this," Karoline said, touching the cross. "At first, I thought it was just something pretty to wear. But after she passed, I realized it was something bigger. It reminded me that even when I felt alone, I never really was." The little girl's eyes flickered with something Karoline recognized, a quiet understanding, far beyond her years. "My mom used to wear one," the girl whispered. She reached for her own neck, where there was nothing but bare skin. She had to sell it. We needed food more than jewelry. Karoline's heart clenched. She didn't hesitate. With careful hands, she unclasped her necklace and placed it in the little girl's palm. The child gasped. "But I can't." "Yes, you can," Karoline said with a gentle smile. "And whenever you wear it, I want you to remember you're never alone." Tears welled in the little girl's eyes as she launched herself forward, wrapping her small arms around Karoline's neck. In the background, the crowd had gone silent. A single act of kindness had started something far greater than any of them had expected, and Karoline knew, deep in her heart, that her grandmother's lesson had come full circle. As the little girl hugged Karoline tightly, the room seemed to hold its breath. People around them exchanged glances, some wiping away tears, others simply standing in quiet awe of the moment unfolding before them. Behind every face in that room, there was a story, a hidden struggle, a private pain. Karoline gently released the little girl from the embrace and noticed a woman stepping forward. Her clothes were neat but worn, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her daughter's shoulder. I don't know what to say," the woman stammered, her voice thick with emotion. "She talks about that necklace every night before bed. The one I had to sell." Her voice broke. "I never thought she'd have another one." Karoline placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "You don't need to say anything," she said softly. "Sometimes it's enough just to accept kindness." At that moment, a man from the back of the room stepped forward. His clothes were dusty from a day's hard work, hands calloused and weathered. Without a word, he reached into his pocket and placed a folded bill into the woman's hand. "For groceries," he said simply. The woman's eyes widened. "Oh, I can't." "Please," he interrupted gently. "It's just the right thing to do." And just like that, compassion became contagious. Someone else stepped forward with a grocery store gift card. Another woman removed a bracelet from her wrist and offered it to the little girl, saying, "Something pretty to go with your necklace." It was as if the entire room had remembered all at once that life isn't about standing alone. It's about lifting each other up. We all carry hidden battles. Some are visible, most are not. And sometimes the simplest act of compassion, a helping hand, a kind word, is all someone needs to feel seen. As the small ripple of kindness spread to the crowd, Karoline found herself thinking about her grandmother. Her grandmother had never been wealthy or famous. She hadn't left behind an estate or written any books. But what she had left behind was far more valuable, a legacy of kindness, compassion, and unwavering faith. Karoline remembered sitting on the kitchen counter as a child, swinging her legs while her grandmother kneaded biscuit dough. "Sugar," her grandmother used to say, "the good you do today might seem small, but it's like planting seeds. You never know what'll grow from them." Looking around the community center now, Karoline saw those seeds sprouting. People who had come for coffee and conversation were leaving with full hearts and a renewed sense of community. It struck her then. Legacy isn't something you leave behind when you're gone. It's something you build with every choice you make, every act of kindness you offer, every hand you hold. Her grandmother's necklace had been a symbol of that legacy, and now it was passing on to another generation, continuing to spread warmth and hope. Karoline smiled to herself. You were right, Grandma, she thought. It really is about the small things. As the little girl clutched the necklace to her chest, Karoline felt a strange sensation, a mix of loss and fulfillment. The necklace had been her anchor for years, a source of comfort during her darkest days. Letting it go should have been difficult, but standing there, seeing the joy and hope in that child's eyes, Karoline felt something she hadn't expected. Peace. It was a profound realization. Sometimes, holding on to something isn't what brings healing. Sometimes, it's the act of letting go, of giving what matters most to someone who needs it more. That necklace had comforted Karoline when she felt alone. Now, it would do the same for the little girl. And in that exchange, both of them had gained something priceless. Later that night, as Karoline walked her car under a sky painted with deep blues and soft oranges, she glanced at the spot where her necklace had rested just hours ago. It was gone, and yet she had never felt more whole. As people continued to offer gifts and words of encouragement to the little girl and her mother, Karoline stood back and took in the scene. What had started as a simple question from a child had turned into a community rallying around a family in need. It reminded her of something her grandfather used to say, "A community isn't just where you live, it's who you lean on."